Okay. Thanks for the concern. Did you, how was it already? Good. Not much already. That's quite the outfit, isn't it? I just wonder who comes up with nickel dime stuff.
Shake my damn ears.
Yeah.
Emphasizing that there is no cookie cutter. You get hundreds of it on the street that's got the same sort of face about it. There's no magic to it. 2 minutes.
She's going to give me a thumbs up.
So you cut all the trees down in that line? I noticed the other day you were plowing.
I don't think they cut them down. I think they're gonna, I don't know, gonna have that.
Ready? Yep. I'd like to call the order of the meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals special meeting Thursday, January 26, 2017 at 5, I'll call it 5:30, 5:29. Before we get going on this meeting, the chair has a couple things to say. For some of you that haven't been here, as you well know, this is a special meeting. I'd like to point out a couple things before we start. There will only be 4 board members here that are voting on this because they heard the last part a couple of weeks ago. I can't remember the date. There will only be 4 of us voting on this because they were present at the last meeting. Also, as you can see, there's a new officer has been appointed, which really has no effect for you. That's all really to run our meetings back here and stuff. Also, I'd like to tell anybody that's here there's a time limit on each speaker. So if we have the information and everything with us, then it is part of the record that we have to let you know that. Other than that, all right, call the order. Roll call.
Mr. Slacker.
Here.
Mr. Hubbard.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Here.
Mr. Hayes.
Here. Okay, approval of the minutes. Any minutes we need to approve? None? I don't think so.
I think we did, yeah, we did have the minutes.
October meeting minutes.
We did?
Yeah, from the previous meeting. We couldn't, until we had all 4 board members, we couldn't approve those meetings.
Okay.
Minutes from October.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'll make a motion to approve
I
the...
had one correction. I think there was a misspelling of Mr. Rose's name. I think there was an extra letter in it, so if we can correct that. Other than that, I think I had nothing else. It's ROSE. I guess I should say that. Yeah, I'm sorry, that didn't. Second.
So I'll revise the motion to
Sorry.
approve the minutes as corrected.
Second the motion.
Mr. Slacker.
Yes.
Mr. Hubbard.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mr. Hayes.
Yes. Okay, before we get into this, I'd like to, one of the things that we have to do, if you're going to speak tonight, excuse me, I'd like you to raise your right hand and swear you in. When you come up to the podium, I'd like you to sign in, name and address and phone number. We're going to go through the swearing in right now. So anybody that's going to speak on this subject tonight, do you swear that the testimony you're about to give is the truth to the best of your knowledge? I do. Okay, thank you. Okay, so this would be under old business. Ready? I'll read it. Item number 4 on our agenda is conditional use for a semi-public use within an A4 district for the property located at 2728 King Road, parcel number 7841531. Staff report?
Yes. The subject property at 2728 North King Road is currently zoned A4 Rural Residential. The primary use of this property has been that of a place of worship since 1974 when the current structure was constructed. At that time, a semi-public use such as a church was a permitted use in residential zone districts within the township and did not require approval by the Board of Zoning Appeals. In 1978, the Sylvania Township zoning resolution was amended, removing semi-public uses from the permitted uses category and placing them into the conditional uses category in residential zone districts. The applicant has occupied the existing facility for the past 2 years as a community center and a place of religious assembly. As they've been using the existing structure, the use has been allowed. However, the applicant wishes to demolish the existing 4,204 square foot structure and redevelop the site with a 9,758 square foot building. By redeveloping the site, the applicant is thus required to conform to current zoning regulations and submit to the conditional use process. In July of 2016, the site plans for the proposed project were reviewed by the following entities: the Lucas County Engineer, Lucas County Sanitary Engineer, Lucas County Plan Commission staff, Sylvania Township Fire Department, and the Sylvania Township Zoning Department. Comments from those agencies can be found in the September 28, 2016 Lucas County Plan Commission staff report and have been addressed by the applicant. On August 24, 2016, this conditional use request was before the Lucas County Plan Commission for their review. The staff for that commission advised the body to recommend approval of the request, but the decision was deferred to the following month in order to allow the applicant to address some concerns of nearby residents. On September 28th, the Lucas County Plan Commission again heard the request, which the staff maintained their recommendation of approval, but the Plan Commission voted to make no recommendation. The proposed project, as indicated on the site plan, meets or exceeds all requirements of the Sylvania Township zoning resolution in regards to setbacks, height, parking ratio, and drive aisle width. There will be 2 access drives with ingress-egress to the site entirely via King Road. A traffic impact study was not required by the Lucas County Engineer's Office. The building footprint represents a density of 6,061 square feet per acre compared to that of 7,400 to 9,800 square feet per acre for most of the surrounding residential. Places of worship, as with other semi-public and public uses such as schools, parks, libraries, and cultural centers, are considered fundamental components of a community. They often blend favorably into residential areas because of their pleasant settings and low negative impacts on the surrounding area. Staff finds that this proposed conditional use is harmonious with the current uses in the area, should not alter the general vicinity or negatively impact neighboring residential properties, and is consistent with the Sylvania Township zoning resolution. Therefore, staff recommends approval of the conditional use request for a semi-public use in an A4 rural residential zone district for the property located at 2728 North King Road.
Okay, any of the board members have any questions?
Is this the same site plan that was set forth in the prior meeting, or have there been any changes to it that you're aware of?
I believe this is the same site plan. This is the one that was emailed the other day from the applicant, but I believe it's the same as the one from December.
I mean, but something was marked revised site plan.
There have been revisions.
Okay.
Since December?
No, not since December 12th. You mean the one I sent you around December 12th for
Right.
the previous meeting? That
Right.
That's the same.
Okay, that's what I
I
had.
thought you meant from the first meeting.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah. Okay, so from the last hearing, this is a different site plan.
Correct.
Correct.
Okay. So, is that,
That was the answer, I think.
okay.
I haven't suggested that. Okay.
Okay.
Anything else? I guess at this point, we'll open it up to the public. Kind of went over the rules, and whoever wants to get up there first, come to the stand.
Richard Wolf, representing Chabad House. I would like
Yeah.
to present what's happened since the last meeting, since there was a reason that it was deferred a couple months. I do want to make the point, the word community center has been thrown out a few times. This is a house of worship. That's really what we're talking about. Since our last appearance before the board on October 5th, Chabad House has taken several steps to inform and work with the neighbors. First step was immediately after the last meeting in October, Chabad mailed a letter to all neighbors within 250 feet of the building, inviting them to attend an informal meeting at the Chabad House. 32 people attended that meeting and were given the opportunity to ask questions, tour the existing facility, and review plans for the new building, and they were encouraged to contact Chabad with any follow-up questions. Chabad also held 2 additional meetings with the Dawsons and Wilsons, whose properties abut the Chabad property to the north. These meetings involved detailed discussions of the neighbors' concerns and included the provision of revised site plans, HVAC drawings, sound studies, and landscape renderings. We exchanged several drafts of an agreement with the Dawsons and Wilsons and their counsel, Mark Rose, in an attempt to resolve all issues. After weeks of negotiation, the Chabad board elected not to sign a separate agreement with the neighbors. However, the Chabad board appreciates many of the neighbors' concerns and is willing to accommodate the neighbors on several items, including building location, lighting, fencing, landscaping, signage, and HVAC screening, as well as other items. Chabad estimates it will spend an additional $35,000 to $40,000 to make these accommodations. Chabad is willing to read these accommodations into the record as a part of the conditional use approval. Mr. Grouse has been provided with the language for these accommodations, which Mr. Rose and I have negotiated on behalf of our clients. And at the board's discretion, I'm willing to read the language into the record, or you can insert the document provided to Mr. Grouse into the record as you might prefer. Just so you know, we also reached out to Mr. Malone, who represents Mr. Kerper, who expressed some reservations at the last meeting. Mr. Kerper had originally, before even the last meeting we had indicated he might be okay with the building if it were flipped in a different direction. That did not work for Chabad in terms of their drawings and engineering. But we did reach out to Mr. Malone again after the last meeting to assess Mr. Kerper's concerns, see if there was a way to address those concerns. After discussion with Mr. Kerper, and on Mr. Kerper's behalf, Mr. Malone responded to us that Mr. and Mrs. Kerper were against the project, would continue to oppose it. However, that the Kerpers would withdraw their opposition if Chabad would either purchase the Kerpers' property or pay the Kerpers $25,000 for the installation of landscape on the Kerpers' property to shield their view from the new building. Based on the many compromises Chabad has agreed to make to accommodate the other neighbors, all of which will benefit the Kerpers, Chabad declined both of those offers from Mr. Malone. I did provide the list of accommodations to Mr. Malone in December. While it's clear that Chabad respects the concerns of its neighbors and will honor its commitment to accommodate them, I want to point out that the only real issue before this board is the propriety of the conditional use requested by Chabad. The zoning resolution clearly states that a semi-public use is an appropriate conditional use for this property and places a worship fell within the definition of a semi-public use. The zoning staff has recommended approval, finding the proposed conditional use consistent with township zoning resolution, harmonious with the current uses in the area, and that it will not negatively impact the neighboring residential properties. As has been stated, or as you know, the site has been used for a place of worship since 1974, and that use will continue in the new building. Not only will the conditional use not negatively impact the area, it will enhance it by replacing an old deteriorating structure with a new attractive building that complies with all zoning requirements regarding setbacks, height, parking, and driveways. And I would just state that there are many places of worship in residential neighborhoods in the township, in the city of Sylvania, and other areas with very similar construction to what's being proposed here. We trust the board will look at all these factors in approving the conditional use. Thank you.
I think it's okay. There's one thing I was going to, I know about your, you have an agreement, a proposed agreement, and you've got conditions just so, you know, that this board isn't bound by that. You would have your own separate agreement if you choose to do so. And I guess we certainly can, those have been presented to us. We can take that under consideration, and if we go that far, we can, you know, take some of those or none of those or all of those. And so
I just want to make it clear that Chabad is committed to accommodating the neighbors,
right.
And we've gone through a lot with them, and we appreciate their efforts, and We have every intention to use the best efforts to get those things done. We want to be good neighbors.
Okay. Yeah, I think we wanted that on the record, that's not something in and of its face that we're going to put on there. So if that makes sense.
Sure.
Okay.
Can you quickly go through and maybe describe what may have changed in the site plan from the first meeting? Is that possible? Can someone do that?
I'll defer to Mr. Gilliland on that if he doesn't mind. He probably can explain it more.
Do you need a copy of it?
Sure.
Sign in and state your name for the record.
I think that's what I was trying to think if there's anything else. Good evening, Mr. White Gilliland. And to answer your question, was it Tim? Was your question? Yes. I recall a couple, but I want to be sure there's some that I don't miss. But one thing we've done, you have yours. One of the big things that we've done since our last discussion is the adding of a screen between the HVAC units and the neighbors to it. You see there's a solid line going around the units?
It says screen wall,
Correct.
right?
Correct. Yes, it's labeled screen wall. The other thing I believe that I recall, and I try to remember when it fell in there, we added 3 more trees to the west in line with the existing trees on the Wilson's property, which is the west property. Those are, you see them, those 3 star-looking items to the left there. And then those were in addition to the other trees we have there just slightly south of them that runs along the whole length of the property. So those were there before, but we added those 3.
Colorado spruces?
Yes.
Okay.
Those were there, and then we added the 3 spruces to the north of them.
Right.
In the west corner. I'm looking real quick and see if... Yes, there's one of what's in listed in that discussion that the items that we're working with them on is that we also there's some dimensions there to hold that area north of the setback line and to the drive as a green space. So I think there's a dimension there, again, just east of the road but west of the Wilson's property that lists those as a 12 to 17 foot green space, so we're planning to keep that green. I think we noted that. Anything else you want to talk about?
As far as setbacks, parking, things of that nature, it's stayed the same?
Correct, yes.
Anything else? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Good evening. Richard Malone. I'm here on behalf of Ken and Erica Kerper. Ken and Erica own the home that is immediately north of the proposed new building to be constructed by the Chabad House. It is the middle home of the 3 homes on Finchwood that is directly contiguous to the Chabad property. It is the home that is most significantly in line with the building that is being proposed to be constructed on the property. When this whole situation was presented, the objection of the Kerpers and the other neighbors was essentially to the fact that the proposed construction on this site of the new building was not harmonious with the residential neighborhood. This has nothing to do with the use of the property. The property has been used and could continue to be used as the Chabad House place of worship and, in our view, more community center in the new building than in the old building, but rather than quibble over that, the use could continue in the existing building or a building that was harmonious with the neighborhood. And that's the issue that we have with the construction that is proposed. The zoning code specifically requires this board to determine that the proposed use is harmonious with the neighborhood. That has to be a specific finding that you find affirmatively that it is. I provided to the board before I came up, or when I arrived tonight, a series of photographs, the first being the very first picture that showed up on the board this evening as the case was called. It's the rendering of the building. It's called Building Update. It shows the Chabad House in the color photo of what it's going to look like when it's completed, assuming it moves forward. Following that are a series of photographs of other Chabad House properties that are surprisingly residential in their style and view. It's just, those are just offered for the purpose of demonstrating that it is possible to have these things constructed in a harmonious manner. The next is a copy of the site plan that is up above you on the screen. And on that site plan, I have highlighted in yellow where the Kerper property is located, in orange where the existing building is located, and in green where the new building is proposed to be located. All those lines are on that drawing. I just highlighted them so that they would be more easily reviewed by the board as we go through this. The next 2 photographs are a photograph taken from the backyard of the Kerper house, one during the winter, one during the summer, showing the view from their backyard to the existing Chabad house property. The next picture is a rendering that was provided to us by the Chabad house, and it purports to depict the view from the Kerper's backyard to the Chabad house without the landscaping that might exist in the Kerper's backyard, but also it erroneously depicts a series of trees that, as I understand the proposal, those are the Colorado spruce trees that are proposed to be planted on the Chabad side of the fence. But those trees that are going to be planted are going to be 6 foot in height. They are clearly more like 18 feet in height as depicted on this particular drawing. And those trees grow from what I understand 8 to 16 inches a year. So it will be a goodly number of years before those trees are poking their heads up as far as this picture depicts. What the picture does depict, though, is that the view from the Kerper's backyard is going to be to an institutional-style building wall that reaches 19 feet into the air, 28 feet into the air, blocking off their view of what now is a rural residential view from their backyard. The next picture in the pile is a rooftop layout that was also provided by Chabad House, and it depicts the 6 air conditioning units that are going to be situated on the roof of the low portion of the building immediately adjacent to the Kerper's home. That's 6 units less than 30 feet away from the Kerpers' backyard. When it was originally proposed, it was represented to us that these were going to be 5-ton units. Now they're 7.5-ton units, at least 4 of them are. There's going to be a lot of air conditioning going on. Now, I understand that there has been some effort undertaken, as I understand it, to shield those units and to address maybe some sound concerns. I don't know that any effort was undertaken to address the sound concerns to the most contiguous property to those air conditioning units, which is the Kerper property. But 6 air conditioning units on a building is not harmonious with a residential zoned and residential neighborhood. It doesn't exist. It shouldn't exist. The next photograph is a photograph, and if you look in the middle of the photograph, you'll see a tall, I call it a stick up in the air with an orange ball at the top, and that's offered to depict just how high the wall that is going to be constructed on the Chabad House property is going to reach as compared to, so anything you see that's below that orange ball that is currently part of the view from the Kerper property is going to disappear from their perspective. The last series of photographs are pictures of residential properties and some commercial properties in the neighborhood. Some on King Road, some between King Road, or on King Road between Central and Bancroft, some in the properties adjacent to this property. I want to direct your attention to the 5th page, which depicts, actually includes in the middle of the picture, there are 3 pictures of homes, and there's 1 picture of the Chabad House as it is proposed. It is decidedly different than the homes that are adjacent to it. It is decidedly larger than the homes that are adjacent to it. They are proposing to build an almost 10,000 square foot institutional size building on a residential property in a residential neighborhood. And the last page shows a couple of commercial properties in the township with the Chabad House in between where it would actually conform to what that type of a neighborhood would typically consist of. The complaint, I need to address the issue, Mr. Hayes, you asked me when we were here in October whether the Kerpers were amenable to speaking with the people at the Chabad House about
Correct.
anything that might be done to accommodate them. And I indicated we would. And no disrespect, we didn't hear anything from the Chabad House. I finally, prior to the scheduled meeting in December, on December 12th, I sent an email or a letter, I don't remember if it was an email or a letter, to Mr. Wolf, and I made 2 counter proposals. One, buy the home, as he suggested. The second was provide funding so that the Kerpers could provide reasonable landscaping on their own property to screen the house, the Chabad House building, from their backyard. The response we got was no. We didn't get a discussion. We didn't get any response as to what can we do other than that. We didn't get a counter proposal. All we got was no. And with that, we proceeded to plan to be here on December 12th, to find that we were not going to be here on December 12th, and now we're here for six weeks later. The bottom line is that the zoning resolution requires that you as a board, before you can approve this conditional use, has to determine that this use, which includes the nature of the structure they're proposing to put up on the property, is harmonious with the residential neighborhood in which it is to be placed. You don't have a choice about making that determination. You have a choice as to how you make that determination, but you need to make that determination. And based upon everything that we have seen and everything that we have presented to this board, that proposed building, irrespective of what they use it for, is not harmonious to the neighborhood in which it is proposed to be placed. It is oversized. It is the issue of the lights on the side of the building that will be up almost to the top of the tall wall on the north side of the Chabad building is a serious issue. Those lights are going to be shining, or the windows, when the lights inside, are going to be shining down onto my client's property 24 hours a day on many occasions, apparently, because of religious factors involving the ability to turn on and off those lights. That is not consistent with a residential neighborhood. The home or the building that is there right now, admittedly, it is old, but it is residential in nature. As you look at it, as you can see from the photographs I provided to you from the Kerper's backyard, when you look from the Kerper's backyard to that building, you don't know it is a place of worship. It looks like a residential home with a typical roof line and size and mass that you would expect in a residential home in the neighborhood. What is being proposed is something entirely different. It's inappropriate for that neighborhood, it is not harmonious, and the application should be denied. Thank you. I'll take any questions if you have any.
Yeah, I've got a couple. When you proposed the tree, or call it the landscaping allowance, was there anything specific with that? In terms, I'm hearing a lot of what you don't like. I don't know if I've heard a single suggestion in terms of working to come to some resolution.
We proposed a landscaping allowance which would have allowed us to develop a landscape plan to shield our property, my client's property, from the building, with the agreement that if we didn't use that landscaping allowance in an appropriate manner in a specific period of time, that money would remain, well, it was going to be placed in escrow, and then it would be released back to Chabad. It was not just give us money and then maybe we'll do landscaping and maybe we won't. Okay. It was specifically going to either be landscaping or the money was going to return to the Chabad house. Okay. And we didn't get a response that that's too much, would you consider something less? We just got no. I understood when the proposal to buy the home was made that was kind of a reach. I honestly, I put it out there. I wanted to give options, but I wasn't surprised that the answer to that was no. That's a major investment. But I was surprised that there was no discussion about landscaping. And the problem is that the Chabad house has presented this, and in fact, there was a photograph put up there, or a rendering, I'll call it, it's not a photograph, of the view from the Kerper house that shows landscaping in between the Kerper house and the fence. We don't recognize that. We don't see that. And the renderings that they have done, as is evident from the rendering of those Colorado spruce trees that are about 18 feet tall, they're simply not accurate. And they don't provide any real assistance to this body in determining what the views are going to be like when we're done. The Kerpers are going to basically be blotted from any view to the south from their property. Whereas right now, they have a typical residential view with foliage, treetops, and whatnot that they can see. They're not going to see any of that. And that sets aside the fact, and I haven't even gone into the issue of the community center use versus place of worship. The activity level on that site is going to be decidedly more than it is today. The building is approved for up to 299 people to use it. The Chabad House has said they will be limiting, I don't know that there's any restriction on or way to enforce it, expecting a use of about 186, but that they would probably max out at 275. That is a lot more people coming and going every day into this residential neighborhood to use this community center where they're going to run summer camp and other activities in addition to using the facility as a place of worship.
I mean, I believe there's, in terms of traffic, I think the access in King Road, I believe that's part of what's been looked into in terms of handling the amount of traffic for the use that's been submitted. That's my understanding. What I'm looking or listening and hearing this, if do you feel that there may have been a point where there could be a landscape plan that could, as opposed to you and your client going in and saying, let's get into the minutia of the design of the building, you're saying there potentially may have been a landscape plan that just allows your client to say, I just don't have to see it, which is probably first and foremost of what...
Well, in direct response to Mr. Hayes' inquiry, I decided that we would, since we weren't hearing from them, and to my knowledge, I certainly wasn't on the invitation list to the meetings with the neighborhoods, with the neighbors, either the Dawsons and the Wilsons or the other neighbors. I know Mr. Kerper wasn't, at least he indicates he wasn't being invited to those meetings. I'm not saying he wasn't there. I'm not saying he didn't find out about the meetings and showed up. He wasn't invited, but it doesn't matter. The point being that we never heard from Chabad with, would you consider this as a solution? Never. I took the initiative to do it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but at least I'm asking that.
Right.
You thought there may have been a potential
And I
solution
thought
for
that
landscape.
had they come back and had we arrived at a reasonable budget for landscaping, and we, as I said, making the point, we didn't ask, just give us the money and we'll do what we want. Put the money aside and we'll do something that works, and it was rejected.
So was
Had that come back and had we agreed on a number, we would be here probably with the Wilsons and the Dawsons in their circumstance.
So was there a plan submitted with the amount, or was there just
No.
an amount submitted?
Well, we just knew that we're going to have to buy some trees, some large trees to put in the backyard. It wasn't going to be an elaborate landscape. It was going to be green buffer, but it wasn't going to be 6-foot Colorado spruce. It was going to have to be a taller tree, something that would provide an immediate buffer to the building view and to the noise that's going to be coming at us from those 6 air conditioning units.
Okay, we're going to take this into consideration as part of the record here, correct? Anybody else got anything to say?
The one thing I think you mentioned on the lighting, I'm pretty confident that, unless I'm misreading, I don't think there's anything religious-wise that's going to, I mean, they may not physically touch or flip switches, but I'm not aware of,
Well,
for 24 hours a day.
again, I haven't been party specifically to those discussions, but I was advised that there was an issue of lights being left on 24 hours a day in the existing building because of the limitations on the congregation. And when we're dealing with a building that's 14 feet tall behind a fence, that's not an intrusion on the neighbors. When you're talking about a ribbon of windows that is going to be about 24, 25 feet up in the air, it becomes a factor for the neighbors. And maybe they've solved some method by which that won't happen, but I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, usually I think they timers and there's all kinds of stuff, but, okay. Just curious on that. Okay. I think I'm good with Mr. Malone.
You good?
May I respond to some of
You okay waiting one more second?
Malone's?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Malone.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a real problem, unfortunately, with what Mr. Malone said. Mr. Kerper has been part of discussions regarding this project from the beginning. And Mr. Malone, as I got involved in this a little bit later in the game, shortly before the first hearing, But Mr. Kerper has been invited, as far as I know, to almost every discussion with the neighbors. He might have not told Mr. Malone that, but he was. There have been many discussions early on. As I said, before the last hearing, Mr. Kerper said, if you flip the project around and all that, I can probably go with it. It didn't work out for Chabad. He was invited to the meeting with the residents that occurred after the last meeting. He has consistently said he and his wife are against this project and will do anything they can to stop it. Mr. Malone received the agreement or the conditions that we reached with Mr. Rose and his clients. He's fully aware of all the improvements we're willing to make, including the lighting. We've agreed to turn off the lights at certain hours. We've agreed to put up a lot of landscaping, and no, we can't plant 18-foot Colorado spruces at the beginning, but they will grow. The HVAC units will be shielded. A noise level study has been made. The noise by that study that has been done, the level at the adjoining properties, the Kerpers, the Dawsons and Wilsons, will be no different than the air conditioning units they hear around their neighborhood because of the shielding and the distance and the fact that most of the noise is going up on those units. The building may be somewhat different, but again, if you look at other houses of worship in residential neighborhoods, none of them look like houses. The synagogues don't look like houses. The churches don't look like houses. They are slightly different in appearance, but as I said before, part of the conditional use is semi-public use. Houses of worship are continued or are included in that. We also did reach out to Mr. Malone after the last hearing, contrary to what he said. Pete Silverman, who's with Chabad House, made the overture to him to see if there was a way we could work things out. Yes, Mr. Malone responded, as we've talked about, with the offer either Mr. Kerper would offer his property or take $25,000 for landscaping. And in his letter, I quote, it says, "The Kerpers would be in control of the selection of the contractor and the landscaping materials and design." So to me, that doesn't really sound like we're going to work out an agreement. Give us $25,000 and we'll decide what to put up. I guess I'm just a little bit miffed. And one more thing, I'm sorry to take up so much time. This community center thing still keeps coming up. It's a house of worship, and houses of worship have different uses, different aspects. Yes, there will be a camp in the summer proposed, but it's not to the extent that's been blown out of proportion in emails and other things that Mr. Kerper has said. And also, the use is not going to be that much more significant than it is now. And frankly, the Jewish population in this town is not growing. And there are 4 synagogues, 4 places of worship for the Jewish religion here, and they're not growing. There's a limited number of people who are going to these houses of worship. So this idea that all of a sudden the use and the volume is going to explode just isn't accurate.
Anything else?
Just very quickly. I never suggested that the Kerpers wouldn't control the landscaping that was going to occur on their property. They are, if that was going to be the case. But what Mr. Wolf did not comment or state was the statement that should any funds remain in the escrow as of December 31, 2017, they would be released to the House of Chabad. Any expenses over the escrow, whatever that amount might have been that would have been agreed to, we never got into that discussion, was going to be the Kerper expense. Whether the Kerpers learned of meetings and participated in meetings is different than whether they were invited to meetings.
Right, so simply, any of that money would have been used for landscaping and landscaping only?
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, you guys.
Thanks, everybody. Oh, Mr. Rose.
Sign up.
I'm up to speak.
Okay, good evening. I am Mark Rose, and I'm an attorney at Marshall Mulhern in Toledo, and I'm here tonight representing Joe and Jennifer Dawson. They live at 7433 Finchwood. And Jeff and Beth Wilson, and their house, while it's in separate ownership, it's owned by It's in a trust. Ostensibly, they're the owners, participants in that house. And they're at 7453 Finchwood. Dawson's and the Wilsons, I'll refer to them, are on opposite sides of the Kerper house, which is Mr. Malone's client. We've heard from the zoning manager that this property is a non-conforming use. It's what we know known as a legal non-conforming use. And under the zoning code, a legal non-conforming use cannot be expanded, changed, modified, except in strict compliance with the zoning code. And because this property, the Kabod property, is zoned A4, which is an agricultural, residential kind of hybrid designation, a house of worship, as it's described, as a semi-public use, has to go through this conditional use process. And the reason I'm giving this background for the record is just to provide context for where we have to go next. A couple things on semi-public uses. They're only allowed by right. That means without having to go through this wonderful process that we're going through here. They're only allowed by right in a general commercial area. None of the residential areas, none of the agricultural areas, can't even put them by right at all, even by conditional use in the industrial areas. So they're only allowed by right. And that should tell us something about how the community views locating and citing semi-public uses. In other words, we got to be very careful to make these areas harmonious with our residential areas and even our other kind of use areas, office, commercial, they're not permitted, and as I said, the agricultural areas. So we look at Chapter 25, or Article 25, and as Mr. Malone said, there's certain standards that have to be found, and I'm quoting here under 2503, with particular evidence, not conclusions, that this is harmonious. See, that's a conclusion. Evidence would be somebody looking and putting side-by-side pictures and reasonable people saying this is harmonious. So conclusions aren't enough. And what I think we've heard a lot of is conclusions. And I'll just state in 2503, and with emphasis on the ones that I'm going to really focus on what the standards are. One is that it be found with the consistent with the general objectives or with any specific objective purpose of the zoning resolution. B, will be harmonious with the existing or intended character of the general vicinity and will not change the essential character of the same area. We'll talk about that in a second. Will be served adequately by essential public facilities and services such as highways, streets, etc. In reference to, and I know that we haven't talked a lot about that, but I don't know whether a traffic study has been performed or not for this to truly determine what the impact's going to be. Will not involve uses, activities, processes, materials, equipment, conditions, or operations that will be significantly detrimental to any persons or property or the general welfare by reason of excessive production of traffic, noise, smoke, fumes, glare, and odors. And will have vehicular approaches to the property that will be so designated as not to create interference with existing traffic on surrounding public streets or roads. Those are the things, the findings the board has to do. Each one, they have to find each one, not one or two, like 3 out of 5. That's kind of, that works for like, you know, in playoffs and things. You win 3 out of 5. Here you got to get all 5. Okay, and you have to have evidence of all 5. It has to be a traffic study, it has to be everything. So this is what was presented in June with the original application, and then we went through July, and then we had there was a proposed meeting, and we ended up getting that deferred down at the Lucas County Plan Commission. And what we decided, we being the Dawsons and the Wilsons, we decided, you know, let's work with Kabod, and let's develop a plan and agreement together to address these items. Now, we can't address the traffic study. That's in their control. I can't get into that. The utilities and access, that serves their building. But the harmonious part, or the harmonious requirement, and the that it won't be detrimental to the community. Let's try to solve that so we can make this, to the extent it's not harmonious, it's not as unharmonious. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but at least it's as close as we can get working together. And like all negotiations and discussions, I know they were surprised with me. We didn't get everything we wanted, okay? And I think they probably didn't get everything they wanted. But in the end, we reached what we think was an agreement, and ultimately, despite what I think they represented to this board on October 5th, that we were going to have an agreement to be signed, they decided, for reasons that are still lost on maybe Mr. Wolf can describe, not to sign the agreement, but we decided collectively that we would present that to the board, and those would be the conditions the board would do, so that the board could say that the board satisfied at least two of these requirements, the harmonious and that it's not detrimental. Without these conditions, or similar conditions, I don't know how the board could do it, because we haven't heard any evidence that it's harmonious. So what we're trying to do is provide that context, that structure for the board, for everybody else, so that this project can go forward. And we support that going forward. If these conditions are not going to be included, we're not going to be able to support it. Then I got to go sit with Mr. Malone and join his team, okay? Right now, we're not in any team. We're the Wilsons and the Dawsons, and we're trying to find common ground to get this project going in a way that mitigates any detrimental impacts. And let's face it, it's not a house, okay? It doesn't look like any of the houses. It looks different than all these houses. That's not necessarily bad or good, it is different. And so we're trying to get this so that it's as harmonious as can be. I'm not going to read all of the conditions. You have them. So you've got them. But I will point out to a few of the things that were important for the Dawsons and the Wilsons, that while we didn't reach written agreement on these things, we have what we hope is a good faith understanding of how those, some of these aspects are going to work. The lighting, for example, and this was touched on by Mr. Malone and Mr. Wolf. The lighting, the Chabad has, for religious reasons, cannot control the lighting manually after sundown on certain days until sundown on ensuing days. And while they're going to try to have timers, technology doesn't always work, and the lights might be left on. So what we wanted was some ability to work with Chabad, and we hope and they've committed to work with us to find a way that on occasions where the lights are left on, that we can contact somebody to get the lights turned off. And why is that important? And if you go to one of your pictures here, I don't know if you guys can scroll to the rendering. I don't want to call it a photo because Mr. Malone has taught me that it's not a photo, it's a rendering. You'll see there that bank of windows on the taller structure. And just to give you an idea, what you're looking at is from the south to the north. So the Kerpers, the Dawsons, the Wilsons are just on the kind of the back of the picture, and not to the right-hand side, but kind of the top going to the north. But importantly, that bank of windows, and our understanding is there's a similar bank of windows on the other side of the building as well. Those will look directly. Mr. Kerper gets to see the wall, which is not so good during the day, maybe for him, but when you're trying to sleep at night and you've got lights flashing out of those large windows into your backyard, it changes the ambiance of what you're trying to have in the evening. And so what we've asked is, let's get the lights off. And they've agreed to get the lights off a half hour after they close. We don't really have an agreement as to what that means when you close. We hope they mean when substantial operations have ceased. We hope that's what closing means. We take them at their word that that's what we think they mean. But we want the lights off. We know that nobody's perfect. Occasionally the lights might be left on. We want to work with them on the lights. We hope to leave you out of that. But that's one of the things I want to be on the record, that our expectation is that we will work together with Chabad representatives to make sure that we can get the lights off. A second item concerns the landscaping. Yes, the trees are going to be not as mature when planted. We understand that. It's going to take a number of years to have the trees. But importantly, in order for trees to grow, especially in the early years, they need to be irrigated, okay? Because we've all seen when you drive by trees that aren't irrigated, especially when they're young, they die, and they're brown, and then the next thing you know, we're getting you involved, or Mr. Grouse involved, saying, look, they didn't comply with keeping the trees going, they got to plant a new tree, and we're fighting. We don't want that, so we wanted automated irrigation. And in fact, the city of Toledo has, in their zoning code, a requirement that you must have automated irrigation. So a project like this in the city, they'd have to get a waiver not to have automated irrigation. We don't have that in the township. And so what we decided, we worked together with them, again, agreed to disagree. They agreed to water it. They don't want automated irrigation. That's fine. Again, we hope in good faith they'll follow through on that, and our expectation is that they will. Last two items, the sign. The sign it has, well, and I haven't driven by lately, but for a long period of time, it was broken and the light was flickering. And that can bother some people. In fact, some communities have regulations about flickering lights because it's been found to create an annoyance that affects mental health, okay, and physical health. And so the fact they didn't fix it concerned us. I hope it's fixed now, and I don't know. Like I said, I haven't driven by. Is it fixed now? It's fixed now. But our main concern is what we don't want is a digital sign, because we know the township allows digital signs. Anybody that's driven by Whiteford and Monroe Street sees those beautiful signs that are essentially blinding when you go by at times. We don't want that on King Road. Our hope is that we work together so that we don't get that. What we've provided in these conditions is, in the event they change the sign, we're going to have to amend the conditional use so that we can get this new sign, and that it'll have to meet the sign code. And we've provided for notice, so we get to see the plans, and you'll get notice, and we'll get to work together to help them develop a sign that's compatible, not only for their property, but with the surrounding neighborhoods. Again, the lighting is what is critical to us. It's not necessarily the height or the size, but the lighting flashing into the backyards is a concern. Finally, on the parking. If you look at the site plan, and this is the most recent one that's been filed, and I shouldn't have said finally, but on the site plan, that's Exhibit B to our conditions that we submitted. That, again, we would hope that will be adopted. If it's not going to be adopted, I'm going to need to know in a hurry, because I'm going to have to change my tone. But the site plan's Exhibit B. It says on the site plan, at some point, maybe Mr. Gilliland or Mr. Lamanco can comment on this, that the parking that is along the south property line, remember they've got a total of 66 spaces proposed. There's, I think, 20 or so of those that says future parking. And our concern is that the site is underparked. Let me give you the exact, I think I said 22 and I meant 22. 22. The 22 spaces on the south property line, future. We want those not just future aspirational. We want those to be, yes, we will put in those parking spaces. And our understanding, again, is that those spaces will, in fact, be installed, be built when they develop, or redevelop, I guess, the site. So we want that parking, and again, maybe we'll hear from Kabad about that on the parking. Now I'll say finally, Exhibit C to the conditions.
Mr. Rose?
Yes.
Yeah,
So where do you see where it says proposed?
yeah, I don't see
You got to go when they send it over on the electronically. You click on various buttons and they disappear. Because and again, I'd like to hear more, and we talked about that. I mentioned that to Mr. Wolf, when we met with him. We want to hear that they are going to put those 22 spots. They show here that they're going to put them in.
12 spaces you...
There's 22 along the south property line, 12 and 10.
Yeah, 12 and 10.
Yeah, but where does it...
So the plan we have, but yeah, so you want it on the record.
And I'm fine, if they say they're doing it,
Right.
great, that's what was our expectation.
Proposed, those are shown as parking.
Now I'll say finally, as far as the site plan issues go, we do provide for, and you talk about getting into the weeds here, but this is actually getting into the HVAC. We provide for, I guess, sound, noise restrictions on the HVACs. And we did this, we hired an expert, or engaged an expert, to provide what appropriate decibel levels would be. That's Exhibit C. Hopefully you have that, I assume. And you'll see for each Kerper, Dawson, and Wilson residence, we've identified what the maximum decibels are. And I brought extras if you need one. Mr. Hayes, if you need, do you need one copy?
Yeah, I have the exhibit C that's blank.
Yeah, we have the exhibits here.
Okay. You sure you have the
No,
decibel?
I don't have it. You don't have it. No, we do not have it.
You don't have it, okay, good. Then
No,
I-
it's blank though, we don't have it.
They came across.
Oh, they came blank.
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, now I understand. There we go. Okay. All right.
This is Exhibit C.
Yeah, you're right.
We didn't have it,
It was, I think, a tab. Something that was sent us.
Mr. Miller, do you need a copy for yourself?
If you have an extra one, that'd be great.
I've got one extra.
Right.
Huh?
Yes, I'll take it.
Okay, great. Again, you can see we went to the effort because we are concerned about the noise. Having 6 powerful HVACs on a roof overlooking your house is somewhat different than what you have when your neighbors has the carrier humming away next to their garage. So because of that, we did 2 things. One, we provided that the HVACs have to be screened, and it went into some detail, and you can see that on here. And in fact, we gave a narrative in the conditions about the screening. Again, we negotiated with that. We proposed some different types of screening. They came back. We think we've worked out a good solution. And then what we've said is, to make sure that everything's appropriate, here are the decibel levels that you can have. So, I guess I'll conclude. We, the Wilsons and the Dawsons, it's important that we have these conditions that we've negotiated, again, in good faith, both sides. Wanted to get something signed, the reasons that, again, are not the Dawsons or the Wilsons making, we're not going to get a signed agreement, and that's okay, as long as they're included as part of the overall approval, because in order to redo them, we'll all come back here and someday, or maybe a different group, or different homeowners, and we can redo it again. But it's important because without those conditions, I don't know how you get the harmonious element and the non-detrimental element, because there hasn't been any real evidence, there have been conclusions, on how you get those satisfied. How do you protect the neighbors without the conditions? We've done the work, the heavy lifting, both sides, and they should be congratulated and not criticized or not ignored by not including their negotiated conditions as they agreed to in this. So I'll leave it at that. I did want to make one correction that on the consistency with the land use plan. I know it's a little bit out of sequence, but it was said that the Cabot House is consistent with the land use plan. In fact, I brought the land use plan with me. I don't know if you need a copy of the land use plan, but the land use plan calls for this property, as with the entire St. James Spring Forest area, to be suburban residential, not to be consistent with the land use plan. To me would be where semi-public uses, and that's why I raised that before, are only permitted in general commercial, C2. That's it. So if they want to be consistent with the land use plan, that's what we do. So this is not consistent. Again, that's why higher level of scrutiny has to be applied by the board, and I know that's what you're going to do. That's why we're here and working so hard to find a solution. So I'll entertain any questions or try to respond to any questions. Otherwise, thank you.
Do you have a signed agreement with the Chabot House?
No, great question. We have an agreement, but again, Mr. Wolf can give a better explanation of why we're not going to sign. We both represented, Mr. Wolf and I, that we would have ink on an agreement when we showed up here. The Dawsons and Wilsons are prepared. We brought pens. We can sign the agreement, okay? But Cabot, again, that's for them. They decided they would rather let's have an agreement It's on the record, let's have it incorporated as part of the conditional use permit. So the answer, I'm sorry, is no.
So the difference being, whatever we read on record is enforceable through this body, which you would have, your private ability and rights to enforce it back and forth.
Yes.
So it's an extra layer of protection. So, okay. Anybody else? Because I certainly would like Mr. Wolf to address some of these, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else, Mr.?
Anyway, and I will only ask to respond if
Sure.
you're not going to incorporate
You wanna-
our agreement. I mean, obviously, I have a whole thick file here of different arguments if you're not going to accept the agreement. We can,
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Wolf, could I ask you to respond to?
Certainly. In terms of the conditions, I said at the beginning that we are willing to have those conditions read into the record. We feel it's important. We did have several good faith negotiations with Mr. Rose and his clients. I think we have reached some excellent compromises on both sides. There was nothing inaccurate about the conditions that Mr. Rose described. And as I've said, it doesn't please Mr. Rose, but even if they're not read into the record, Chabad has told the Wilsons and the Dawsons we're going to do those things. But I understand Mr. Rose's point of view, and we have no issue with them being read in the record, and we're fully committed to honor what's been negotiated.
So I guess like one of my concerns are, Exhibit B is the drawing. If they're read into the record, any kind of deviation, no matter how minuscule, I mean, is enforced by, by the zoning department. So, I mean, it adds a layer of, regulation, I guess, to any kind of changes. That's a kind of concern of mine.
I'm sure it does. I would hope that when Chabad does these things, if there's some minuscule changes in things, that the Dawsons and the Wilsons will continue to show the reasonableness that they have and not be, barking up a tree on every little, no pun intended, on every little thing that might be a little bit different. But, I don't disagree with you. It does add another layer to it.
Yeah, I don't know that I see them as minuscule. I mean, I think when you go for site plan approval, I mean, you're going to see, I think, pretty much every one of these issues needing to be addressed. So, I mean, at least that's my opinion.
I guess I'm just saying if a tree is slightly to the side of something, if it's a foot over one way or something like that, but I understand your point. But again, no matter what happens with those conditions, Chabad is committed to do the things we've talked about.
So some of the key ones, at least from hearing the HVAC screening, the soundproofing, that's gone into detail, that's
going to happen, yes.
And some precautions from manual overrides on lighting.
Yes.
So is there going to be irrigation, or there will not be irrigation?
There will be irrigation. We have not agreed to an automatic system. We really haven't. Again, we're already committed to $35,000 to $40,000 of extra expense in the accommodations. An irrigation system adds to that. There will be adequate irrigation for those things, and it doesn't make much sense for Chabad to spend all this money on plantings, et cetera, and not take care of what's on their property. So we are committed to irrigate. I believe it's in the conditions. We're committed to provide adequate irrigation. We have not committed to a specific system, and frankly, that alleviates one of the issues in terms of enforcement of the site plan. We're not saying we're doing one certain system that's going to be part of that, but Chabad is going to irrigate.
And you're agreeable to not having a digital sign?
Our understanding is we've committed to a digital sign that would not continuously change. It would remain static and change only over certain amounts of time.
Okay, so that's...
So yeah, that was, I think, a little bit different than Mr. Rose said, but that's where we are.
In this day and age, I'd be surprised that almost everybody, schools, everyone's using it.
Correct. We're not going to have a constantly changing flashing sign.
Okay.
And that is in the conditions.
I'd like to at least address Mr. Malone's comments about specifically landscaping in terms of potentially a solution for that neighbor, staying away from the back and forth of, the potential ability of coming up with some arrangement for Mr. Kerper in terms of landscaping that, at the end of all of this, what we're talking about, he wants to be shielded from seeing what's there. I think that makes it a lot more harmonious for him. Any thoughts on that?
Well, again, we feel based on the conditions we're talking about with the Dawsons and the Wilsons, that a lot of that landscaping benefits Mr. Kerper as well. We're fine with putting landscaping on our property as we've committed to. The Wilsons and Dawsons are satisfied or willing to go with what we proposed in the conditions. We think that Mr. Kerper's property is being treated equally with what's being put up there. Another $25,000 for him to put stuff on his property, it's a different animal, really, than what we're talking about with the Dawsons and Wilsons. We're talking about landscaping on the Chabad property that we're spending money on to help with the view of those three neighbors.
Anything else?
What was the reason why your client would not sign an agreement directly with the property owner?
There was a board decision, the Chabad board made that decision. I was not part of the board meeting when it was made. I believe the feeling was if we could get them read into the record, it was always our idea that the way to enforce the conditions for the neighbors was through the resolution, and also there's a statute, Ohio statute, that gives adjoining property owners the right to enforce resolutions that are passed for zoning purposes. This accomplishes the same thing. Separately, we had a private contract that was in addition to that. My understanding is the board just preferred to do it as a matter of record and have it enforced that way.
Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else? Anybody else have anything to say?
I'm Kevin Romanko, the applicant. I don't have a pen. Just a suggestion on when we're talking about reading into the record these documents. If you take a look at the site plan itself, a lot of the issues that are in this document are already addressed onto the site plan itself that's being approved. A lot of times when we do building drawings, we have a list of specifications that are attached to the plans and become part of it. So as an alternate suggestion is that we attach these conditions to the plans as part of the specifications that go along with the plan approval. It's just a suggestion. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate the effort that Mr. Wolf and his client and the Dawsons and the Millers and Mr. Rose have undertaken to mitigate the fact that this is not harmonious. Mitigation does not change the fact that it is not harmonious. It doesn't flip it and make it harmonious with the neighborhood. This board needs to determine that what is being proposed is in fact harmonious, not that steps have been taken to try to eliminate some of the more glaring objections that the neighborhood would have. Secondly, with respect to the landscape issue, the comment was made that the landscape is on the Chabad side of the property. I agree. The landscape is on the Chabad side of the fence. The only people who will see the landscaping that the Chabad is putting in for the first several years at least is going to be the Chabad people on their property. It's not visible through the fence. It's not visible over the top of the fence. It serves no purpose to the benefit of the Kerpers, the Dawsons, or the Millers. The Dawsons and the Millers are differently situated than the Kerpers to that property. The Dawsons and the Millers don't have their entire backyard confronted by a 29-foot block wall. That's what makes their situation different than the Dawsons and the Kerpers. But the landscaping that they're proposing to put in does nothing for the neighbors.
Okay, if that's it, we're going to adjourn. we will come back and we will we'll give our resolution and what we came up with. I like that. That's right.
Is that, Alice, so we tell her,
Yeah. Who's out there?
we may need him.
He's cute.
Okay, oh boy. That's theirs. Steal a rubber band.
Ready? Okay, we're back in session. What the board has decided to do, that we have 20 days to render our decision. We will render our decision February 15th at 5:30, 2017. The code permits for this decision. The public hearing is closed as of now, and in that legal amount of time, we will render the decision to the public. Done.
No. Motion,
Okay. now-
motion to adjourn.
We have to do any new business? He's got any new
I'll make that
business?
motion to
Do we
adjourn.
have any new business? Do we have any new business?
No.
No. All right,
Adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
second,
Okay.
first, I second.
Yeah. Yes and yes.
Mr. Hilton?
Yes.
Mr. Hayes?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
We're adjourned.
Thank you.